finishing up our series for January, which has been on prosperity. And we started this series at the beginning of the month along with the rollout of a program, our matching funds program for 2019. Now there's a detailed description of what that's all about in your bulletin. It's on the back of the handout that I put in there every week. But the short version is this. Once we reach our monthly offerings goal of $8,900, every dollar over and above $8,900 will be matched to a maximum of $10,000 for the year. So every dollar above $8,900 for the month will be matched to a maximum of $10,000 for the year. I'm sure you can kind of see the potential there. It's a way to turn a lot of money into a lot more, which is a really, really good thing. Now, here's where we are for January. This is as of last Sunday. We're at about $7,600. So we got to hit that $8,900 threshold, and then everything above that gets matched. So I will leave it at that, and I'm not going to go into this kind of detail every Sunday from now on. We will do an update toward the end of the month just to let you know where we're at as we work on our goal of maximizing the matching funds that have made available through the generosity of a donor who wishes to remain anonymous. And we say thank you. Okay, so this topic for January on prosperity is based on a very well-known book in Unity circles, a book by Unity minister Eric Butterworth. It's called Spiritual Economics. And he suggests that we need to add a spiritual component to the way that we deal with money and prosperity. Makes sense to me. Good accounting, money management practices, and things like that are still essential. Income has to equal or exceed expenses, or you've got problems. But there also has to be some consideration given to how we deal with those things at the level of consciousness. We need to ask some questions like, what are our habitual thought patterns when it comes to money? Are we consistently thinking that there's not enough? Are we envious or judgmental about what others have? Is there an element of greed or stinginess in our thoughts about money? How about fear, anxiety, insecurity? Now, none of those things that I've mentioned are really healthy or adaptive, and they can actually stand in the way of progress and prosperity. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they arise from the intangible, or what I call the spiritual side of reality, which includes our thoughts and the way that we use our thoughts to construct a mental framework, a worldview when it comes to anything, but in this case, a worldview when it comes to money. Spiritual economics is about maintaining the kind of mental discipline and flexibility that we need for dealing with the insecurity and negative thoughts and feelings about money that can arise. It's about maintaining that kind of mental flexibility at the level of consciousness so we can be open to possibilities, so that we won't miss opportunities, so that we can find the kind of inner peace that it takes to maximize our creativity and resourcefulness when we're working with a project, which is what I like to call a problem or a challenge. They become a project from this state of consciousness. So last week, I left off by saying that we were going to be talking about one of the major keys to helping to maintain that sense of poise and inner peace and mental flexibility that leads to the creativity that we need. And maybe some of you might have guessed what that might be. It's one word, starts with a G, and it's gratitude. Gratitude. I borrowed the title for today's lesson, Stop, Look, Go. That was from a TED Talk by my favorite teacher on the art and practice of gratitude, Brother David Stendal-Rast. I think we have his picture up there. He is. He was born in Austria, and if you've ever had the chance to hear him speak, he still has this, he has a German accent that's so thick you could cut it with a knife, I guess, as they say, which never gets in the way of his communication. It never gets in the way of what he has to say, or with him being able to very clearly communicate his wonderful ideas. Now, as a young man, He survived the Nazi occupation, which I guess if that was something I went through, I'd have plenty of reason to be grateful. So that's probably how it all started. Gave him plenty to be grateful for. He received a PhD in fine arts from the University of Vienna, and after that he decided he was going to move to the United States and get rich. Now how you do that with a PhD in fine arts, I don't know. But of course we all know that he became a Benedictine monk, and they're not exactly known for their personal wealth, are they? Actually, they take a vow of poverty. They own nothing, everything's held in common. But he kept on with his studies. He got additional degrees in philosophy and theology, and then he became a part of the growing interfaith dialogue that was happening then. It was inspired by Vatican II. He was working with people you all have heard of, like Thomas Merton, the Dalai Lama. He's traveled thousands of miles on lecture tours covering all the continents, bringing spiritual depth into the lives of thousands of people from all faiths and, of course, from no faith at all. And his message is simple. The only religion that really matters is one based on principles of gratitude, generosity, and compassion. And so those were the values that serve as the foundation of an organization he started called the Worldwide Network for Grateful Living. Here's the web page up here. Just go to gratefulness.org, and there's all sorts of resources, videos, talks, links, and things like that deal with grateful living. So Brother David, he's 92 right now, and he continues to lecture and publish and things like that. I'm sure he's slowing down a little bit, but he's still spreading that message about the gentle power of gratefulness and how it can restore courage and reconcile relationships. And actually, he thinks, and I think he may be onto something here, he thinks it can heal the earth. So Brother David wrote a book called Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer, and Henry Nouwen wrote the foreword to that book. And here's what he wrote. He said, "In the midst of a world in which fear, apprehension, and suspicion make us live stingy, narrow, and small lives, Brother David stretches out his arms, smiles, and says, 'Love wholeheartedly, be surprised, give thanks and praise, then you will discover the fullness of your life.'" Brother David believes that spontaneous, deep gratitude is an experience of joy. And it's a special kind of joy that flows from a very simple awareness that whatever we happen to be experiencing in the moment is the result of this freely given gift that we call life. Some people call that grace, and they give the credit to God. Other people give the credit to nature. Either way, it's no small thing to be born human and experience this thing called life. And it is in that simple realization, according to Brother David, that we can find the root of true gratefulness. Everything springs from that realization. Life is a gift freely given. Life is, no matter what. So during the TED Talk, Brother David asks a rather interesting question that I think challenges our intuitive understanding of this subject. He asks us, what is the connection between happiness and gratefulness? And the reason I say it's an interesting question is because I think intuitively most people would think that when you're happy, that's when you can be grateful. Brother David questions this. He challenges this assumption because I think we all can think of people who seem to have everything one would need to be happy, but they're not. You don't see any expression of happiness. People who have all the material comforts that you could imagine, wealthy beyond measure, and you don't hear a word of gratitude, much less an expression of joy or happiness. So many rich and famous celebrities who make the headlines for all the wrong reasons. So it's there. Now, on the other hand, there are people like this man who I've talked about before. Let's see if we got him up there. The guy, there we go. His name is Manoj Singh. He lives in Calcutta, India. And we're going to be showing a very brief clip of his life story here. This clip is from a movie called Happy. That's simply the name of the movie, Happy. I believe we've shown it here before. We're going to share that with you here this morning. If Jacob has given me the high sign, I can get out of the way of the screen.
What I hope to do with these little video uploads is introduce you to some of the characters in the film. I want you to meet Manoj Singh because he's a person who impacted me deeply while making this film. He lives in a hut made of bamboo sticks covered in plastic bags in a place where people have been kind of pushed to the edge of society because of their social status or their financial status or a combination of these things. Every day at about 4:30 in the morning, Manoj Singh wakes up, gets on a bicycle, goes into town, and pulls a rickshaw through the streets of Calcutta for 12 to 14 hours a day. And the money he makes is barely enough to feed his family. But what struck me about Manoj is that he was not suffering. He was actually a vibrant, proud, dignified human being who had a wonderful family and lived in a community that in many ways looked healthier than many communities that I see in America, because what this community had was a real sense of camaraderie and people really looked out for each other.
So there's an example of how that works. And if you've seen the movie, and I have, I'll tell you that Manoj is the real deal. This isn't a facade that he's putting on. This isn't an actor playing a character. It's the real deal. He is genuinely content and happy. And if you get a chance to see the movie, check it out sometime. I think it's now available for streaming online. It says up there, rent for $2.99 through some service. Look it up, Happy, the movie. It also features someone else we're very familiar with here. It also features Matthew Ricard, who wrote the book that we worked with, I think it was the year before last, 2017, the book Happiness. Matthew Ricard happens to be a Tibetan monk who is an expert on happiness. So that's another excellent book, and he's also featured in there. But Manoj is genuinely content and happy in a situation that we might have a hard time with. And Brother David tells us that people who radiate happiness like that start out by being grateful. They're not happy first and then grateful. They start out by being grateful. So gratitude leads to happiness, not the other way around. And that kind of makes sense if you think about it. Because if you're not grateful for what you already have, then there can be never enough. Happiness is always somewhere down the road when you get the next big thing or the next big experience happens, whatever that is. And if we think that happiness makes us grateful, then we need to think again. Brother David believes that gratitude is an expression of our courageous trust that life itself, kind or harsh, happy or sad, is good only if we receive it as a gift. And the moment that we trust in this truth, we are at peace, and a person at peace will serve as an agent of peace in the world. Courageous trust, that's the key, because it makes gratitude the antidote to fear and anxiety and other negative things that can come up in any context, but in this case we're talking in the context of our relationship with money issues. So that means that we want to have some kind of gratitude practice in our spiritual toolbox so that we can use it in all situations, and of course in particular situations dealing with fear and anxiety relating to prosperity. But it's not one of those multitasker, unitasker tools. It's a multitasker. It's not just prosperity issues. It's anything that comes up that leads to fear or anxiety that we can use this to work with. Now, Brother David isn't suggesting that we have to be grateful for everything, okay? Do you see the crucial distinction that's coming here? In his TED Talk, he tells us this. He says, we cannot be grateful for violence, for war, for oppression, for exploitation. On the personal level, we cannot be grateful for the loss of a friend, for unfaithfulness, for bereavement. But I didn't say we can be grateful for everything. I said we can be grateful in every given moment for the opportunity. And even when we are confronted with something that is terribly difficult, we can rise to this occasion and respond to the opportunity that is given to us. But it takes practice. It takes practice and it takes preparation, and we can't wait for a time of grief or crisis to start the process of practicing and preparing. We need to make it a part of daily life before that happens, which is why Brother David's organization is called a Network for Grateful Living. A Network for Grateful Living. It's a life practice, which brings us back to the title of today's lesson, Stop, Look, Go. You know, we get taught that as children, right? Before we cross the street. Stop, look, I'll make sure there's no cars, and then go. Stop, look, go. Which is the same method that we can use to learn how to practice gratitude moment by moment. The problem, probably for most of us, 99% of us have the problem of remembering to stop. We've forgotten to stop. We race through life, we forget how to pay attention to the seemingly small things that are actually the foundation to grateful living. Brother David says we have to learn how to stop and get quiet. We have to build stop signs into our lives and learn how to pay attention to those seemingly small things. How do you think our friend Manoj in Calcutta would react to having hot and cold running water in his little plastic covered bamboo shack? Imagine, turn a handle, out comes clean water, hot or cold. Or electric lights that come on at 4:30 when he's getting up with the flip of a switch. But I think the better question is, how do we react to those things? We may have stopped reacting to those things. Do we even react at all? I guarantee you we react when those things go away. When there's a power outage, we're on the phone. Oops, well that's out too, right? But you know, we're looking for the cause of it, or if there's something wrong with the plumbing and there's no water, can we react to that? We certainly do. We have to stop and look in the midst of those seemingly small things. That's where we create the space for gratitude. We create it, and then we have to make it a habit. And it just so happens that the meditation that Karen led today is an excellent way to practice. It's called the 3-minute breathing space exercise meditation, something we learned about during a meditation class we had a few years back. And the authors of the workbook that we used in that class said that the 3-minute breathing space meditation is the most important practice in the entire program. And I'll just give you a refresher on the 3 steps. The first step is we step out of autopilot. Turn off autopilot and take the controls. And we ask, where am I and what's going on here? And you'll be surprised how many times when you ask that question you realize that you actually have an answer that'll surprise you. Oddly enough. The aim is to recognize and acknowledge one's experience at the moment. Second step, bring your attention to the breath. Gather the scattered mind. Focus on the breath. And number 3, expand attention to include the sense of breath and body as a whole. That's the practice. That's the practice. And we're going to also put a copy of Karen's meditation from today on the website along with the talk, so you can look at it, you can listen to it, and you can look at it, the steps in your handout in the bulletin. So those are the 3 steps here. It's a meditation that we can use to punctuate the day. It's a meditation that we can use to do that all-important step of stop and become aware of the seemingly small things. It's a way that we can more easily develop and maintain a compassionate and mindful stance in the world. Whatever comes our way, we can have that sense of inner peace. And in essence, what it starts to do is it dissolves the negative thought patterns before they gain a toehold, a foothold, and get control of our lives. This can often happen before we're even aware of it, so it gives us a chance to see those things happening. Where am I? What's happening? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? It's also, we could call it an emergency meditation that allows us to see clearly what's arising from moment to moment when we feel under pressure. Right? When we get into that pressure situation, it allows us to pause when our thoughts are threatening to spiral out of control. And it helps us to, again, regain that compassionate sense of perspective and stay grounded and really take control over where the thought spiral goes from there. We can tell it to stop. Anyone can find 3 minutes during the day, probably more than once during the day, to try this. And again, instructions are in the handout. Karen's meditation will be on the website. Use it to learn how to stop and get quiet for a moment, to begin paying attention to the small stuff that we seem to take for granted. Those things which really are the foundation for grateful living, and which again serve as the foundation for maintaining that sense of equanimity and peace of mind that enables us to be creative and calm in situations we have to deal with. It's the key to happiness. It's an important tool in any situation where we want to cultivate clear thinking and inner peace. And that's really it for now on the topic of prosperity. I think we've exhausted the subject for now. In February, we're going to be moving into what they call the Season for Nonviolence, which starts this Wednesday, January 30th. I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means next week. We're going to be spending the month of February on something that I promised we'd revisit in detail. You might remember during our fall series based on the book Resilient, that we spent some time talking about this all-important field of interpersonal communication. And in that particular chapter, they talked about something called nonviolent communication. And I said that, this is way more than we can cover in one Sunday talk. So instead of doing it in one Sunday, we're going to do it for the entire month of February. Nonviolent communication. Come on back next week. Find out what that means. See you then.